Okay, so it's Thursday morning, April 10th, 2025,
Hmm.
and wow, um, the Asian markets just went crazy.
Yeah, it was a wild ride over there.
Seriously, like Tokyo's Nikkei 225 just shot up by almost 9%.
9%.
Yeah, hitting like 34,510.86 or something like
So
that. I
nuts.
know, right? And Sydney's S&P SX 200 wasn't far behind either, jumped over 5%, and then Seoul's Kospi went up over 5% too.
Yeah, a lot of people are probably wondering what's going on in Hong Kong and Shanghai right now, waiting for those markets to open.
For sure. But, um, you know, all of this excitement actually started with Wall Street's performance the night before.
Oh, yeah? How'd that go?
Well, let's just say it was a day for the history books.
Mm-hmm.
The S&P 500 gained almost 10% in a single day.
Seriously?
Yeah. And the Dow Jones jumped by almost 3,000 points, which is like a 7.9% increase.
Wow.
Oh, and the NASDAQ soared by 12.2%.
That's incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
what happened?
Well, it seems like all of this can be traced back to, well, former President Trump.
Trump.
Yeah, so overnight he put out a message on social media saying that he's putting a 90-day pause on most of his tariff plans.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so remember, he's been talking about these tariffs for weeks now, and it's been causing a lot of uncertainty and anxiety in the markets. So this announcement, well, it kind of felt like everyone took a deep breath and relaxed a little bit.
Yeah, I bet that makes sense.
It's kind of like, that feeling when you're stressed out about something and then you suddenly find out you don't have to worry about it anymore, at least for a while.
Right, right.
But, it's not as simple as that.
Oh,
Yeah, you see, this pause doesn't apply to every country.
really?
Yeah, so while a lot of countries are getting a bit of a break, China's actually facing a tariff hike.
A hike?
Yeah, Trump specifically mentioned a 125% tariff increase on goods from China.
Whoa, so it's like a mixed bag then.
Exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
it's good news for a lot of countries, but the situation with China is still a big concern.
Yeah.
So to understand what's happening now, we kind of have to look back at what's been going on in the markets lately.
Oh, for sure. Context is everything.
Right. So over the past few weeks, we've seen a pretty noticeable downturn in the markets.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of that can be attributed to, you guessed it, these tariff concerns.
I see.
For example, the S&P 500 had dropped almost 19% from its recent high.
19%. That's pretty close to a bear market, isn't it?
Exactly. And that could be a big red flag for investors.
Yeah, no kidding.
Plus, we've also been seeing rising Treasury yields. The 10-year U.S. Treasury yield actually climbed to 4.50% earlier this week.
That's a significant jump.
And, for anyone who might not be familiar with this stuff, Treasury yields basically reflect the return you get on investing in U.S. government bonds.
Right.
They're kind of a benchmark for borrowing costs across the whole economy.
Uh-huh.
So when those yields go up, it can signal a change in how investors are feeling, and it can affect things like mortgage rates and even how much it costs for companies to borrow money.
So basically, it can have a ripple effect throughout the entire economy.
Exactly.
Oh.
And all of this was happening before Trump's announcement about the tariff pause.
Right.
So essentially what we're trying to do today is understand the immediate impact of this pause, what factors are driving the market's reaction, and most importantly, what it all means for you.
Right, because at the end of the day, that's what really matters.
Exactly. So let's start by looking at how the markets reacted immediately after the announcement.
Okay.
Well, as we've already mentioned, it was pretty much all positive, especially in those Asian markets.
Yeah.
Japan, Australia, South Korea all saw huge gains, which shows just how much those tariff threats were weighing on investors.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But we have to remember that this wasn't a universal celebration because China's situation is still pretty tense.
Right, with that big tariff hike looming over them.
Exactly. And that kind of creates a split in the global reaction.
Oh.
Well, on one hand, some businesses might be relieved, and they can maybe use this pause to adjust their supply chains or avoid some immediate price increases.
Uh-huh.
But on the other hand, China is a huge part of the global economy. And the fact that they're under so much pressure could have consequences for everyone.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
And we also can't forget that this 90-day pause is just that, a pause.
It's not permanent.
Right. The underlying issues haven't disappeared, and the threat of tariffs could come back after this break is over.
So it's kind of like a temporary truce.
Exactly.
Interesting. So what do you think will happen after these 90 days?
Well, honestly, it's hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
It could be that this pause is a genuine attempt to negotiate and find some common ground with trading partners.
Except for China, apparently.
Yeah, But it's also possible that this is just a strategic move, and the tariffs could come back or even get worse after the 90 days are up.
That would be rough.
Yeah, and then we also have to consider how the bond market is reacting to all of this.
Oh, yeah. That's an important piece of the puzzle.
Right, so we did see some calming in the bond markets after Trump's announcement. The 10-year Treasury yield dropped a bit, but it's still higher than it was a week ago.
Right.
And that's important because higher bond yields mean that borrowing money becomes more expensive for everyone from big companies to regular people looking to buy a house.
So even with the stock market doing well, these higher borrowing costs could slow down the economy.
Exactly. So it seems like there's a bit of a disconnect between the short-term optimism in the stock market and some longer-term worries that are reflected in the bond market.
Interesting. So it sounds like we're in a pretty unpredictable situation.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to think about what all of this means for the future.
What do you mean?
Well, since this tariff pause is only temporary businesses, and consumers need to be prepared for more changes in global trade.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
Right. So think about how companies get their products, how
Mhm.
reliable those supply chains are, and how the prices of everyday things might be affected.
Right.
And for anyone who invests, it's important to think about how to navigate this uncertainty and what strategies might help protect your investments.
Wow. That's a lot to consider.
It is, but it's important stuff, and it's all connected to what's happening in the markets right now.
You've given us a lot to think about.
Well, I hope so, because it's going to be really interesting to see how the next 90 days play out.
I agree. This is a story we'll definitely be following closely.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for breaking all this down for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And to all of our listeners out there, we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of finance and economics.